and we'll get underway. So, Gemma, do you want to start the slideshow, or do you want me just to show the Jamboard first?
If you show the Jamboard first, and then it saves coming in and out for us.
Yeah. So this was relatively new to me when both Gemma and I did a computing course the other day, and they used Jamboard quite extensively. I thought, well, it actually is quite useful. It's a Google product, so it's like Google Classroom or Google Forms, Google Sheets. It's just one of their products. It's a bit like Microsoft Whiteboard. It's a bit like Padlet. I just think it's probably a little bit neater than Whiteboard for multiple entries. And basically anybody who's got an invite, and I'm going to put the link in the chat in a moment, can go to this Jamboard and create a little sticky note. You can be all anonymous. We don't need names tonight. And you can post something and you can doodle and so on. And you can have multiple pages of the Jamboard. So when you've got lots of users, you can space it out. You can see, you can brand it and customize it. So for tonight, I just thought I would use it because we are asking you a few questions with slightly longer answers. Obviously, you could use the chat, but it's also quite nice maybe to see everybody's all in one screen. So we're just giving Jamboard a quick go tonight, and something you may want to pick up and use. And as I say, in a moment, I'll put the link in the chat. So that's just a quick plug for Jamboard. We'll use it at the end, when we've got some questions for you to answer. Okay, I'll stop sharing that. And
brilliant. Thanks, Dan. So my computer start sharing. Okay, so today's session is all about looking at beyond remote learning, using technology to support catch-up. And I'm really lucky today, obviously, Dan and I are both here, but we're joined by Vicki Chadderton and Joe Jackson-Taylor from their schools, which are part of the UL network, and they will be joining us and sharing how they've been using technology to support catch-up in their schools. So in this session, it is going to follow on from previous CPD sessions. And don't worry if you didn't attend the last one, Dan's put the link in at the bottom for you as well. It's going to build more on that research by the EEF, but provide more practical strategies and tools. So last time we were looking at things like Notebook and Teams and PowerPoint. Today, we're going to be moving on to different strategies, and hopefully there's going to be something for everyone. I know Matthew can't be here with us today, but it is that continuation that he said last time. It's riding the wave and keeping the momentum going. So we've actually split the session into 3 parts. We're looking at catch up for teaching, catch up for targeted support, and wider strategies. And Vicky's got a lovely link for us in the middle where she will move us from our teaching to our targeted support. And again, this all comes from our EEF research. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Dan.
Yes, thank you, Gemma. So Jamboard, I've talked about briefly. I've put that link in the conversation chat. So if at any point you've got some nuggets to share, please share them via the Jamboard. You can use the conversation thread as well. We don't need to say too much more about it, that it is something you might like to have a look at. There are some useful support materials for it. So if you think it's going to be useful, do take a look. But we'll press on to the next slide now. And this starts off on the assessment and feedback and the importance of that. Now, that's never gone away. I remember when I first joined United Learning quite a long time ago now, we were doing a lot of work with Dylan William and his black box and all about assessment for learning. So that hasn't changed. So it's hardly going to be a surprise for us that high quality assessment is essential to teaching, and it's part of the recovery and catch up process. Yeah, of course it will be. Now, how we approach using technology for assessment and feedback is going to depend on what access the pupils have to technology, because there are some great methods and platforms for using tech for assessment and feedback. Forms, which is much loved part of the Office 365 suite, which Gemma and I never tire of extolling the virtues for. There's others as well, other platforms that colleagues might be familiar with: Kahoot, Quizlet, Socrative. All of those, though, require the children to be using technology to key in their answers or select their answers. And so one which we have looked at a few years ago at Best in Everyone, but is still around, is Plickers, which is kind of a slightly lower tech input. So we will have a bit of a look at that and a quick recap on the forms. So if we go on to the next slide. Excuse me, I don't want to spend too long on this because we did look at this last time in terms of forms, and it's well documented how useful forms can be for assessment and feedback, and also how well supported it is. So the United Learning ICT channel, lots of tutorials, how to do things. And the good thing is it's quite straightforward as well. You don't really need more than half an hour of kind of input and you'll be a forms expert in no time. So we know forms is good. Let's move on and just have a quick look at this slightly lower tech, Plickers. That's where only the teacher has access to technology. And in some of our classrooms, that may be it. The teacher's got an iPad or some other tablet device. Potentially you could use a phone, but I know schools are going to be sensitive, and rightly so, about how phones are going to be used in a classroom environment. So I would have thought in a primary setting, this is going to be the teacher's iPad or an iPad that the teacher has access to. And basically it's a system for multiple choice answers, and because it uses a square piece of paper or a rectangular piece of paper that has 4 sides, therefore there's 4 ways of holding your Plicker card up, and each way represents answer A, B, C or D. And when that's held up, the teacher scans the room. In advance they've allocated a number to a child, and therefore they can work out who answered what. We're just going to watch about 33 seconds of Plickers in action. If you wouldn't mind just clicking on the video link for us there, you can just try and visualize what's happening. We don't actually need the sound. So here the teacher is scanning, the children are holding up, their numbers are registering when their answer has been scanned by the system. So scan round the room. You wouldn't do this for the whole lesson, but in key hinge point moments. And we'll just pause it there. You can see where the children then get the assessment of all their different answers. The teacher can make a quick decision about whether to move on depending on the success rate of that question. And that's going to be something that teachers are used to using. Oh, I've got about an 80% success rate. I know who is struggling, but I can move on the lesson. Or I've got a 50% success rate. I better stop here and kind of spend a little bit longer. So it's low tech, but it still gives you that useful assessment for learning information. And if we just jump on one slide, Gemma, we'll just sum up that particular one.
There we go.
There we go. Oh yes, I just wanted to point out, as if you didn't know, but the curriculum site has lots of these quizzes and questions ready for you, so you're not always having to start from a blank piece of paper. Here's an example of some questions you could use for the Year 4 history unit, for example. So you could put those into your Plickers or your Kahoot or your form or whatever system you're using. The only thing I would say is if you are using those sort of systems that take individual pupil details, remember you do need to do that DPIA if you're going to adopt a system for the first time for your school. Okay, if we move on, so assessment and feedback is going to be very important. Of course, we can use technology, we can use low technology as well, like Plickers, Got lots of positive reasons for doing that. All of those platforms will have Android and Apple apps available. They all basically encourage participation and are paperless systems, and can be quite engaging if used in the right way in the classroom, particularly for those daily and weekly reviews that you're doing quite a lot of at the moment. So that's a quick shout out for Plickers and other assessment and feedback systems. I think I'm done on that little section.
Brilliant, thanks Dan. So our next section will be looking more at feedback, in particular how we can use technology to provide verbal feedback. So in our last session, Gemma, who I know is here with us today, so thank you again for this, Gemma, she did look at how we can use feedback and give instant feedback via our collaboration tools on PowerPoint. Now, and Dan also shared how we could do this with Class Notebook, and again we've got that written and verbal feedback that we can give to each individual child. Now, one of the things that I absolutely love when I'm in the classroom is giving verbal feedback, but quite often I found it hard to be able to get around all of my children in one lesson and in every single lesson. And also it's that retention. So for myself, I know I struggle with retaining things when I'm told them. And it's that when you're making the same mistakes again, to keep looking back and seeing how you can improve. So I've been investigating a different way to record verbal feedback. And what I found with this example, and it can be done, I did it on my laptop, but you could do it on an iPad, you could do it on a Chromebook. And it's about actually sitting there and recording your verbal feedback for the children. So you can use your voice recorder and then you record exactly what you would want to say to the child. So when you sat down with their books at night, record what you want to say to them. And then what you can do is it will save automatically into your voice recordings, which I thought was great. Then what I started playing with is about how you could actually share this. So it might be actually that the children have their own folder that they access via OneDrive at the start of each lesson, and they can listen to their feedback. By doing this, it means that they can listen to it again and again and again. So you may have given them 2 next steps. They can listen to their first next step, action it, and then go back and listen again. It might be a couple of days later when you get them to recap on their learning and say, oh, what were your next steps last week? Have you included them? If you're doing that in verbal feedback, sometimes it's quite hard to actually remember what you've been asked to do. Whereas if it's in a folder or emailed, or perhaps you could even turn the link, so your live link, into a QR code, and at the bottom of each child's book have a QR code. Then they can constantly go back and listen to their feedback and then act upon it. So this is something I've not had the opportunity to try with a class yet, but I'll be really interested if anyone does take this little nugget away with them and has a go and sees that it's had an impact with the children for their feedback. We would be really interested to see that, because I'm hoping it would work, and in my mind it will work, and hopefully then the children can actually access that verbal feedback all the time. So what I'm going to do now is, still in our catch up for teaching element, is hand over to Joe, who's going to talk a bit more about visualisers.
Thanks very much, Gemma. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here and great to see you on a beautiful sunny afternoon down here in the south, and I hope you had a chance to enjoy the weather too. So first of all, in terms of catch up teaching, one of the things that the EEF talks about is quality first teaching. And so why use a visualiser? Brilliant for so many things. Demonstrations, when you think of a science demonstration perhaps, visualisers can be incredibly important rather than all trying to crowd one round, that one experiment. A brilliant way of exemplifying guided practice and sharing that with the whole class. And Vicki will talk later about how that could possibly be through a traditional visualiser like I've got set up just next to me now, or indeed an iPad. In terms of scaffolding, there's a brilliant article last week in TS about teaching up. So rather than diluting learning objectives for differentiation purposes, that we scaffold up to allow everyone to meet those challenging objectives. Visualisers are a great way of scaffolding access to the curriculum. Providing live feedback, what better way of promoting progress than grabbing someone's work and sharing those successes, or maybe those areas for development. And through that, intersecting those misconceptions to make sure that that's not a widely shared misconception, but you deal with it at its inception. And of course, I think they're really valuable for promoting metacognitive talk. That is, modeling through your thinking and explaining, narrating your decision-making processes so children can harness those processes themselves rather than being implicit and hidden for the children. And one of the basic things, but really important, I think, for all of us as teachers, is for underpinning presentation expectations. They're a huge part of pedagogy in Shanghai, where I've been out to, but as Gemma's told me from first-hand experience, across Asia actually, and there's very good reason why they get used so widely across those high-performing jurisdictions. Thanks, Gemma. If you go on to the next slide. Oh, just a little shout out to Tim Dolan there. He's got a great YouTube couple of videos on the use of visualisers, so I should definitely give him a shout out. Thank you, Gemma. So in terms of the EEF specific guidance using digital technology to improve learning, we're just going to focus in on that second strand there of how technology can be used to improve the quality of explanations and of modelling. Now, technology has the potential to help teachers explain and model new concepts and ideas, but of course, like any tool, it's about how it gets used. And I've got some top tips that I'll come to at the end of 3 examples that I'd suggest we all consider before using visualisers. Thanks, Gemma. So the first example I'm going to have a look at is a kind of Key Stage 1 example around a Year 2 pitch, really, around division. And division is something that for our secondary school colleagues is probably, of the 4 operations, one of the most hollow conceptually. And moving on from the EEF guidance, thinking about the teaching for mastery principles of securing conceptual understanding, we want to do our best to exemplify things in a mathematical arena that helps children securely understand what's happening. So the why is where the how as well as the why. And Daniel Willingham, famous cognitive scientist, brilliant book. I'd highly recommend it if you haven't read it, Why Students Don't Like School, talks about the sense-making role of educators. And in this case, the sense-making that we need to attach to physical resources so they can not only reduce cognitive load, but also help children to make sense of those models that you place in front of them, which in themselves, of course, do not inherently have a mathematical meaning for children. And going back to our secondary colleagues, thinking about sharing and grouping, I think this is one of the things that we don't often do enough to explore when it comes to division. And grouping really does underpin those formal algorithms. But of course, we tend to reach for that sharing model when we have a think about, when we explain division in general. I'm just going to switch to my visualizer now. So fingers crossed that's up and running and we'll share seamlessly.
Yes, all good, Joe.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Dan. So in this example, where we've got, as I said, from kind of a Key Stage 1 example, probably Year 2, 10 divided by 2 equals 5. It would be really important to say, okay, here we are, class. Well, we can see that our whole here, we've got 10 cubes. Now, let's just double check that we have, yes, there are 10 cubes. I can see that by either counting in 2s or thinking about counting each one, but hopefully we can see there are 10 there. I'm just going to double check that we have 10 cubes altogether. Yes, we do. Our whole is 10, and we want to divide that by 2. And in this case, I want to share it into 2 equal parts. So if I do this, and I'd like you to do the same, class, so I'd like you to pick up your resources, make sure you're 10 cubes, make sure you have 10 cubes, and then you split that into 2 equal parts. And so we end up with this. Does everyone agree? And of course it would have, no, Mr. Jackson-Taylor, that's not right, that's not what it looks like. Oh, but 6 and 4 make 10, doesn't it? Yeah, but you haven't done it right, Mr. Oh, what was my mistake? Oh, I haven't made 2 equal parts. And of course, the multiplicative reasoning that we're referring to when we're thinking about division is that we have equal parts. And in this case, the division model that we're exemplifying is that of sharing, and that we're producing 2 equal parts, or in this case, halves, to make sure that we have 2 equal groups of 5. Now, of course, there's a different story that goes with 10, how many groups of 2 there are in 10. So it's important as a teacher that you're aware of those elements too. And that's where I would bar models, in this instance, this is what I've set up, are incredibly important for pre-algebraic thinking, but there is a lot of argument to say that it's, in terms of variation theory, worthwhile presenting also with part-part whole models and showing how that relates to number line as well. And what does that look like on a number line? This would look like 2 jumps of 5, of course. We've split 10 into 2 equal groups. Thanks, Gemma. If you could flick back to the PowerPoint.
Just coming. That decided to go to the, let me just flip ahead.
Perfect. Next example, if we kind of propel ourselves forward to the upper key stage 2. This was a lesson that I taught recently with year 6, and we thought about what happens with ratio. And with ratio, the important things are for children to really get the understanding of pattern iteration, and to make sure that they grasp the idea of constant relationships. So alongside the pictorial, I'd always recommend having a physical resource. And in this case, I made sure that we all had multi-link cubes. Unifix cubes even better actually in this case, but I only had multi-link available. And so that we can really explore that scaling and simplification through demonstration and imitation from the children. So I'm just going to flip back to my visualizer now. How's that? Can everyone see?
Yep, great. Thanks, Joe.
Fantastic, thanks, Gemma. So in this case, you can see that the first thing I would do is mirror that pictorial representation that we had, and we'd say that, okay, our first question, true or false, for every 1 red cube, there are 4 blue cubes. Well, at the moment, I can see 2 red cubes. So the first thing I need to do is say, well, these 2, if we reduce that pattern, then we can see that actually, that for every 1 red cube, there are 4 blue cubes. If I was making a necklace, of course, and I was sticking those together, I'd need 1 red cube and then I need 4 blue cubes. And that is how we'd simplify our ratio. And indeed, I'll then talk to children about the abstract representation of that. That, of course, when we have 8 to 2, then we can simplify that to 4 to 1. And I can see that's just out of shot there, but I'm sure you follow my point there. Once I was happy that we were all on the same page with that simplification process, I then begin to have a little look at, well, what happens if we scale up? Now, can you see, class, that for every line of cubes there, how many cubes are there? There are 5 in each line, yes. So when we have 2 sets of cubes, 2 lines of cubes, then we'd have, yes, that's right, 10 cubes altogether. And then how many cubes do we have now? Brilliant, yes, we have 15 cubes, fantastic. Our second question was that for every 20 cubes, 16 are blue and 4 are red. Now, just a little note, of course, I realise I'm using black cubes here, but as I was preparing, I couldn't find any more blue cubes, so I hope you'll forgive me. Now, at this point, then we'll say, well, how many cubes do we have altogether? Do we have enough yet to satisfy the parameters for this question? No, not yet. How many more lines would we need? How many more times we need to iterate this pattern? We'd need to iterate it once more. We need 1 more line of cubes. Do we have 20 cubes now? Yes or no? Oh, you think we do? Why is that? Okay, so 4 5s make 20. Of course it does. Yes, right. Okay, so now we have 20 cubes. Is it true or is it false that 16 are blue and 4 are red? Well, can you see, class, how many red cubes there are? Let's count them together. 2, 3 and 4. Yes, there are 4 cubes. So that side of the statement we can satisfy. And how about our blue cubes? Well, if we counted 4, then we can indeed see that there are 16 altogether. So alongside this, thanks, Jim, if we just switch back to the PowerPoint now. Alongside this, I would get children to be working through the algebraic notation to go alongside that. And what I realised is that some of our high-performing children, although they could do the number work pretty well, they were finding it difficult when it came to this second question in particular to apply some well-reasoned and justified answers. And it caught quite a few of our high-performing students out, which I found really interesting. And it was through the use of those manipulatives under the visualizer and actually grabbing one of the children's whiteboards and their explanation that we managed to dispel that misconception. Final example, please, Gemma, that we'll go on to is all about time. Now, my daughter is she's in year 2, she's just turned 7, and she's been getting to grips with time. And one of the things that I've realised as we've been talking about time is that we cannot underestimate as adults how much there is going on with time. In terms of cognitive load and working memory, there's the different representations. There's the analog clock face as well as the digital clock face that you get on an iPhone or perhaps on your screensaver. There's the representations that we have, the language, the prepositional language of to and past, as well as the double track number line that each singular increment, of course, refers to a multiple of 5 at the same time, as well as that double track number line being in the circular manner as well. So what I found is that a dynamic manipulative is incredibly important for beginning to break down all of this, for intercepting misconceptions. And I'll talk a little bit about the circular number line too. Thanks, Jim. I'm just going to switch back over to the Visualiser now. So one of the first things that I'd do, if we look at that example of 10 to 2, and I'd present it like this, is ask what the 10 means and what the 2 means, and of course what the 2 means, because there are 2 2s in this sentence here. And what does this 2 actually mean? And by breaking that down, oh yes, it's 10 minutes to 2, then we can count in those increments of 1 all the way to the o'clock point. Really, really important for children to grasp that passage of time. That it's something that incrementally goes around an analog clock face. And there's nothing like having these manipulatives in the children's hands for beginning to explore them. The second thing I do, as I referred to that circular number line, and what that means is I'd use lots of work on a number line. And where, if you imagine the clock face now, the analog clock face as a circular number line, what we want to do for children is to kind of unwrap that from the clock. So you've got a representation, and I'll do that. I'd use a tape measure or something like to unwrap that from the clock and show how actually what we're talking about is a number line. And of course, that's incredibly important because you cannot rely on base 10 algorithms to calculate durations of time later on. So when we're working with time, the key things that I work on is first of all just a single track number line before we then start working on a double track number line. By that I mean for every increment of 1 hour, there are of course 5 minutes that go with that. And like that, we can start to intercept those misconceptions that often occur around working with time durations. Finally, on to my top tips for today. Thanks, Gemma. So my top tips today that I'd like to share with you is that for a start is to plan discrete points in the lesson. It's sometimes there is a place for the ad hoc use of the Visualiser, and as I said, one of those is for live marking, absolutely. But in terms of a careful modelling, there's nothing that beats a carefully considered explanation with a language, attendant language to go with that, attendant mathematical vocabulary, and as simple an explanation as possible. And within that, then a Visualiser can support that process. Pause points. So harnessing Doug Lemo's idea in the remote classroom around making sure that we have students that are cognitively accountable. This idea of ping pong, as I've heard referred to in teacher mastery circles, if you like, keeps students active. So I do a little bit, you do a little bit, we keep everyone active throughout the lesson. As well as modelling deliberate mistakes. Everyone loves the teacher making mistakes, of course. And my other top tip would be to make sure that you've got those resources ready to go, so you don't lose the pace and flow of a lesson. Thanks, Jim. That's me done that section there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hand over to Vicki, who joins us really nicely in joining up the Catch Up for Teaching and the targeted support, but with the use of iPad. So thanks, Vicki.
Thanks, and thanks, Joe. So I'm kind of building on what Joe's just talked about. So like, why use an iPad instead of a Visualiser? So I find that sometimes it's just really nice to use an iPad just for some variety, because the children just like to see that, they just like to touch the technology sometimes, you know, and it's just nice for them. It's in when you do your explicit teaching and your modelling, it's a lot easier if you've made a mistake or you want to change the way you that you can quickly rub it out, whereas if you've used a piece of paper, it's not always that easy to rub out. And they're really great for moving around the room. So if you want a child to demonstrate, rather than getting them to come up to the visualiser kind of goes to them, and the work gets displayed on the board. And so I find it really useful in the guided practice part of a lesson, where you can have the child using child speak to demonstrate after you've demonstrated, with just a little bit of like the teacher just recapping the language that's been used, and also feedback. So taking a picture, a live picture of a piece of work, like Joe was saying before, instead of bobbing it under the visualiser, taking a photograph and just editing it on the iPad, and you can zoom in and rub things out and change, you know, and you can keep changing things, which sometimes when you edit it, you make a decision, but actually the children want to change it a bit more, and it's just that little bit easier. Just the technology helps to with that side of things. So on the next slide, I've got a couple of videos for you. And so the first video is showing just an example of me using the iPad in a little catch-up maths lesson. We were just doing a recap on subtraction, and so I modelled how to do it, and then I asked a child to remodel it again so that the children could hear like child speak. And then the children then worked on the activity. The second video will just show a close-up, because I'm aware that on this video you can't actually see what the children see on the screen. Just shows a close-up of what the children would actually see on the screen using the Microsoft whiteboard. So if you'd like to press play, please, Gemma. So we're doing subtraction. We're going to use the column method to help us. We are going to put our tens in and our ones to help us. Okay, Mustafa, looking at the board, please. We have got in our first number, I have got 9 tens and I've got 7 ones, and I'm subtracting 33, which has got 3 tens and 2 ones. Doing my ones column first, I've got 9 ones, subtract 3 ones is 4 ones. Doing my tens column, I've got 9 tens, subtract 3 tens, which is 6 tens. So my answer is 64. Okay, Patty, are you okay to show us how to do the first one on the sheet? Yeah, okay, there you go, there's the iPad. Remember how we talked about using the pencil, choose the colour that you want, and away you go, Patty. You're looking at the board and you're watching and listening to Patty. Big voice, Patty.
So you've got your tens and you've got your ones.
Okay, brilliant.
When you do the bigger number at the top.
Okay, brilliant.
37.
37, superstar.
Take away 24. So you 7 take away 4.
7 ones take away 4 ones is. So I kind of reiterated the language. So she just did 7 take away, whereas I then talked about the ones, the fact that we were doing ones. 3 tens take away 2 tens, mates.
1
10.
and the other.
Okay, everybody else, you can now get on with the rest of the sheet. Off you go. And then if we just click to the next slide, we probably don't need to watch it all, Gemma, just to show a little bit of a close-up of what the children would actually see on the board.
So the close-up version, this is what the children would have seen on the screen in the lesson. Okay, guys, so I'm going to put in my place value labels top there to show the columns to help me to put the numbers in where I need them to go. So I've got the number 137, so I've got 100.
The advantage of
and I've got
having it like this on the iPad and it coming up on the screen, and of course when it comes to behaviour management, you can just kind of move around the classroom. You're not tied to the front, so you've got it in your hand and you're walking round. keeps the children on the toes as
7
well.
ones take 1 ones is 6 ones. 3 tens take 2 tens.
I think we're
is
okay
1
to leave
10.
it there now.
100.
Thank you.
That's right. Thank you, Vicky.
So I'll just pick up from Vicky there. Thanks, that's very interesting to see. I just want to move on to using our Chromebooks now. As I'm sure you're all aware, we've purchased a huge quantity of Chromebooks across the group, which are now finding their way back into schools. And I just want to kind of reiterate a couple of points about how we might be using those. Firstly, about keeping them assigned for vulnerable pupils. So they have a means of accessing digital content, and that's very important. Otherwise, there's no point using all these platforms if children can't find the relevant work and materials. So making sure they are assigned for vulnerable pupils, and that's probably an individual with their own username and account, and it's kind of their Chromebook. But we may find we've got kind of an excess of Chromebooks that we don't need to assign to individuals, and therefore we can put those in something called kiosk mode, which means they're not assigned. Multiple users log into them, and then they can be used maybe for catch up and for recovery. The thing to bear in mind with a Chromebook is that it is a web-based device, and it's fine for web-based apps. If we want to go beyond the world of Office 365 and raw productivity, then we may want to look at additional apps in the longer term to deploy to our Chromebooks, so we can get even more out of them. So if we move on to the next slide, I just want to talk through one example of how a school or schools are using the Chromebooks as part of their digital intervention strategy. So our 2 children in the picture here, at a time that doesn't affect their core lessons, they'll be logging on to the Chromebooks. Notice they've got headphones, so if there is any multimedia, it's not going to impact on the rest of the classroom. And these devices are in this school deployed 4 Chromebooks to every classroom as part of that digital intervention strategy. And outside of core lessons, they can access those Chromebooks, and they'll have a targeted sort of intervention program, and that will be using Teams via an assignment to get their little bit of work, which could include a quiz or will include a quiz at some point to check their knowledge and understanding. And each school, no doubt, will come up with their own intervention or digital intervention strategy for using these Chromebooks, but it is important we start thinking about it so access to materials is maintained. I think, Vicky, you've got something quite similar, but just a different perhaps number arrangements or whatever. Just tell us a little bit about how Abbey Hay are tackling it.
So we've ended up with absolutely loads of Chromebooks. So we have we've put most of them, now that the children are back into school, into kiosk mode, and they're being used in the classroom for interventions, and just for generally to access digital things like doing quizzes for accelerated reader, and using research on the internet, and then we've got this bank of Chromebooks that we've kept, that if a class has to isolate, we then assign them back to the pupil again so that they can then go home and be used. So we kind of kept a little bank back that haven't been divvied up into the classrooms. Joe's
yes, I see Joe, do you want to come in there and just share what you're doing at Avonwood?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's very similar, actually, Vicky, that we've kept that kind of setback for deployment should the bubble go down. We've also decided to keep our kind of a curriculum set aside as well, and then the surplus that we have been deployed. We've decided to be quite surgical, if you like, in terms of where we deployed them, and focused on year 4, because we've signed up to the multiplication tables check, the optional check this year, but in preparation for getting both staff and just giving a bit of I guess a bit of impetus to year 4. We felt that that was something that kind of dropped over the lockdown period. And for year 5 too, with a real focus on timetables rockstars, because we think that timetables knowledge in general across Key Stage 2 is something that could do with a little bit of a boost. So that's how we're using them, alongside some English strategies that we'll come to in a bit.
Yeah, thanks for that. And as you see, there's no one right way to use them. That's going to be down to individual schools. But the key thing is, have a plan and start using them. Don't put them in a cupboard and lock them away, and then think a year later, oh, we should do something with those Chromebooks. Let's get them out. Let's get them used. But let's keep vulnerable pupils, having access to digital materials. Right. Thanks, Gemma. We'll move on. And this is just as, again, that East London strategy, and there are other ways and other means, just to show you that they're using class teams, they're targeting that input. There may be an assignment in this case where they use, a Word document or a forms quiz, and they can assign it to an individual student, so it's very personalised, or it could be to a group of students who have similar, recovery catch-up needs. Okay, let's just move on to the next slide. And again, this is just going back to the Chromebooks and saying, well, what if we do want to supplement the diet? At the moment, we may be perfectly happy with Office 365 productivity, accelerated reader, anything kind of web-based like that. There may come a time, though, when you want to kind of get more creative with those devices. You might want to use Book Creator, which is a tried and trusted app that we used to find on the iPads, can be used on the Chromebooks. Adobe Spark, I remember it was probably only 18 months ago, Jen Reynolds and I looked at Adobe Spark, and we ran some workshops on that just to get that creative edge. We looked at how we could use it for book reviews to bring those alive. You've got video platforms as well, because there's no kind of intrinsic video editor in a Chromebook, but you can subscribe to things like WeVideo. So it's starting to think in the longer term, probably for September, how are we going to use those? What additional apps might we need? But again, I'd come back to the point that, do think GDPR and the necessity for a DPIA if you're using pupils' personal accounts. We have got DPIs done centrally for Book Creator and Adobe Spark, which you could use as a template.
Dan, a DPIA being a data processing impact assessment, is that correct? That's
right. It's basically a screening tool. So as soon as you start children signing up for a particular platform and they're giving over their email, then that person, that organization becomes a data processor, and we just have to kind of go through due diligence, screen it, check it's okay. It usually is, particularly the ones I'm sharing with you. They're not kind of unknown things, but because of GDPR and the way things are, you do have to be quite careful about that and make sure your lead at the school is informed, and we have sort of templates that you have to fill in. And here's just a Book Creator. As I say, it's always one of my go-to apps on the iPad. I always recommend it for schools because it's such a versatile tool. They've done some sessions, and there's a link there to how to use Book Creator for catch-up and recovery. Synthesizing that hour-long webinar, basically you can use newspaper and magazine templates to kind of switch the scene, give a context for their writing. You can create glossaries of technical terms that they may have missed or they need to know, and we can put maths manipulatives in them as well. So it's a versatile app that some of us know quite well through iPads, but they work equally well on Chromebooks. So let's jump on to the next slide, where I just want to reinforce our Office 365 platform as our core platform for pupils being able to access digital resources. We know about Sway. It's easy to use. It's very visual. We can embed forms and things into it. We've used it before. We can carry on using it. Some of us started out using class teams in the September, autumn term, and that was very successful. We can carry on using that, use it for assignments as a hub for materials. Probably less well used, but equally useful, or an alternative method, is to use something called Class Notebook, one of the apps in Office 365. Very easy to organize children's work for them to navigate and find anything they need. And we'll hear about Immersive Reader later, but it has that inbuilt support. So they're the kind of three main platforms I just want to talk briefly about. So if we go on to the next one and look at Sway to begin with. And I'm just thinking about, we've got lots of PowerPoints, lots of materials. How can we make those accessible to children? And if you take the knowledge organizer bit, and I've just gone to the curriculum website and pulled up a history PowerPoint. It's a knowledge organizer, it has some key information in it, and it has also some key, if you like, questions that you can put into a form that will go inside the Sway. So here's an example of using a Sway for catch-up. Access to that can be made available for pupils. We learnt a lot of skills in lockdown 1. I would say don't lose them. Use those as appropriate to kind of build up a bank of useful kind of knowledge organisers for children to dip into for recovery. Moving on. Those of us who started using class teams may not have explored the tabs element, but the tabs in a class team is a great way of directing pupils to the content that they may need for catch-up and recovery. So we can add a PowerPoint directly into the class team. We can add a Sway. We can add websites with maths manipulatives in there. Whatever we need, we can simplify navigation and make sure the pupils can find, the resources for catch-up and recovery through their class team. And then finally, if we're using Class Notebook, and I'm a big fan of Notebook, I think it's a really good way of building up a digital portfolio for children, but we can create sections explicitly about, recovery knowledge. This is what we should know, and here are the materials to help you, in class time, outside of class time. We can embed the PowerPoints that, we've created or we've got from the curriculum website directly into that page. We can use the insert PDF method to get the content of the PowerPoint directly into the page, depending on, how complex and how useful it is. So, we've got these different platforms all in Office 365, which you can really kind of utilize to make sure children have got, access to those digital materials. And I think that's that bit covered, Gemma.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. So one of the things I love about doing these CPD sessions is being able to draw upon the expertise of everyone across UL. So I actually was fortunate enough to speak with Jill Todd, with Jen Reynolds and John Keach about things that they've either recognised or heard as well with using technology to support maths, English and for SEND. So when I met with Jill, she really recommended that, like we have been doing, using the White Rose materials and forms. But she also shared with me something called MathSpot. Now, MathSpot I had not come across before until I spoke with her, and it's actually a free website where it has a whole array of different manipulatives. Now, with the time, I'm not going to be able to go through all of these today, but they're absolutely brilliant for the children to be able to use if you've got a class isolating, if you've got children working with iPads or Chromebooks in front of you, perhaps when you're trying to find different resources that you don't have lots of. So it's one that I really recommend when you're targeting that support for maths. Now, Vicki, what have you been doing with support for targeted support for maths?
So we use White Rose Hub material, and we have also we're using the Shine gap analysis, and we've introduced the Shine interventions, some of which we've had to teach whole intervention sessions because it's something that the whole class have struggled with.
Brilliant. And what about you, Joe?
Yeah, hi, Jim. Equally, we've been using Shine. We found sometimes that that summative data hasn't given us enough granular detail, and so we've used something called RTP quizzes. So the Ready to Progress criteria were published last summer by the DfE. Great piece of guidance. We've put together some quizzes for the school, and I'm just having a look at now putting that onto an electronic platform, something called Classroom Remember More, which is essentially a retrieval platform, but equally it could be forms, but looking at a digital delivery platform in order to use those, because we're using those more of a paper base for the meantime, but they're valuable. More widely, Hegarty's been brilliant for Year 6. Timetables Rockstars, like I said, has been used in Year 4 and Year 5 particularly. And we're just having a look at a couple of other platforms. Conquer Maths is something that Jill and Mark are looking into, and has some real potential. And one that I've used previously called Doodle Maths is a fantastic responsive learning algorithm app that delivers great content for catch-up, actually.
Brilliant, thanks guys. So then moving on to the English aspect, I know we talked a lot about these before, and both Jen and Karen talked about them in their session, but all of these different apps, as well as using your Word, your PowerPoint and your notebook, are fantastic strategies for really looking at targeting support within English. Joe or Vicki, was there anything you wanted to add to the English targeted support that you've been offering?
So we've used the Shine interventions for the reading gaps, and the children are really enjoying them. They really like the reading Shine intervention. And we've also noticed that during the numerous lockdowns that children have really struggled to just getting their sentence structures together and making sentences that make sense. Right across the school. So we're using a book called Daily Sentence Structures, and it's a little 15-minute like structuring sentences at the beginning of every English lesson. So everybody in Key Stage 2 is having like a 15 minutes at the start of every lesson that's just sentence level, just to recap how we build up sentences.
Brilliant, thanks Vicki. Joe, is there anything you wanted to add for the English support?
Just to endorse those Shine reading activities, really. I think that they're great. I think they're in particular, they're well structured, and they use similar texts for across the course of intervention, but really build in some independent skills and a bit of reading stamina. And I think it's engaging. That's where Chromebooks can be used brilliantly, because the content is engaging electronically and allow children to work at an appropriate pace too.
Brilliant, thanks guys. So then moving on to SEND and interventions. And when I spoke with John, he was really keen to share that he'd seen like speech and language therapy being delivered across teams. He'd seen constructing sway pages with videos to support children. And then linking back to what Joe shared with us earlier, that continued use of visualisers with equality first teaching has really been supporting SEND children. Now, another thing that we're all very passionate about, but I'm going to let Vicki talk about this, is immersive reader and the dictate feature.
So this, I found out about this in a little kind of golden nugget from a previous session. And it is really fantastic. So within 365 platform, there is Dictate and Immersive Reader, and I would say they're excellent and underused tools. Are brilliant for both your SEN and your EAL children. Can we move on? So looking at the Dictate and how that works. So with the Dictate, you can use it within Word, PowerPoint and Class Notebook. And you'll find the Dictate function, which allows children to say the words they want to type. So it kind of takes that that struggle of writing or typing away to from the child. They can compose the sentence and it appears on the screen for them. So that's really helpful for SEN and EAL children to like lessen that burden of actual scribing. And then there's also the Immersive Reader, which allows the children to listen to writing. So you can either have them listening to the writing that they've typed or produced themselves to check if it sounds right or not, because often you find that, and I find it myself, if I read my own text, I actually read what I think I've written, and so the children do the same thing, but actually if they've typed it, they actually listen to what's been typed, and so they can see what's right and wrong. It's also great if you've got some struggling readers, if they're information gathering, and it can read the text to them. And what's a really lovely feature in Immersive Reader is that you can actually change the background colour to meet the needs of your dyslexic learners. So they have their coloured overlay, then you can actually change it to the coloured overlay. Let me go to the next one. And then within the, as part of the Immersive Reader, there is also a picture dictionary. Now, as far as I'm aware, it's only available on the online version of Word. I can't find it in, like, when you open it on your desktop, it's not there. You have to use the online version of Word, and so it reads to them, and they can click on a word and it shows them a picture. So in this example, the word dough is there, and they click on the word and it shows them a picture of what that word actually means, which is again really great for EAL and SEN children because they can see it. They don't have to read, they can see it. Can we go next slide, please? And you can also translate. So if you have got a child who is EAL, whose home language is not English, you can provide them with a piece of text that you want them to read for information gathering, and you can they can translate it into their home language and then listen to it in their home language so that they fully understand it. I just think both of these are just amazing. They're just brilliant. And so you can use the Immersive Reader. It's also available in forms as well. So when you do a quiz for the children, they can click the little sort of book icon, and it shows the Immersive Reader open, and they can listen to the question. So again, then it's particularly good in like non-core subjects where you're wanting them to focus on the history knowledge, the geography knowledge, and you don't want them to get bogged down in the reading. And another trick. Go on.
I was going to say, it is really brilliant to use it for those non-core subjects.
Yeah, I love it. And you can also, the same works again with the voice recording in Sways. So you record the instructions. I wonder whether we could also use that voice recording in Sways to give feedback as well, like you mentioned before, Gemma. So you've got the sway, and the children can just, because if everyone's not got a device, they could perhaps go to the one device that's in the room and listen to their little feedback recording as well. So
I like that. Thanks, Vicki. So that leads us on really nicely to our final part. We're going to look at those wider strategies that we saw in the EEF document earlier, supporting the social, emotional and behavioural needs. Now, one part of the research shows the way that we can support children is by giving these collaboration opportunities. And again, thank you, Gemma, for this bit. Gemma did bring up how we can use PowerPoint to collaborate. And you can also use this as a collaboration page on Notebook. And then as Dan shared with us this morning at the start of the session, looking at something like Jamboard, but do be careful because obviously Jamboard is anonymous. Now, another part that the EEF recommends is really looking on well-being, self-regulation, and self-esteem. So this leads me to something that you can't put in your teams yet. It's hot off the press. I am allowed to share it, but it's very, very new. So coming to Teams soon is a new tool called Reflect. Okay, and within this tool, it's going to look like this nice little heart, and you'll be able to add it to your Teams page, and you can then do electronic daily check-ins with your children. Particularly great if you've got a bubble down or children at home, or if they're using the Chromebooks, they're checking in, seeing what they're doing. Now, within this Reflect tool, you can select, it does come out anonymously, so the children can't see what each other put, but you can actually have a look and see how the children are feeling. Their classmates, you can choose that all of it's hidden, or you can see generally how the whole class are feeling. So when you hover over each one, you'll actually see which student selected that emoji. There has been a lot of research I was reading earlier about children expressing their emotions, and actually the link with emojis, they're finding it a lot easier to then be able to show that emotion. And that's what the Reflect tool builds on. And you can also look back, because it collects the data within teams, you can look back and see how they responded on previous reflections. And then also the dates. So if you're beginning to try and track and look at any trends, you can use this for this. Now, because that's all the information that I've got, when you do get these slides, I have put the links in here for you, so you can learn more about Reflect. I'm pretty sure Dan and I, as soon as it goes live, it will be on our Twitter. We will be sharing and playing with this and giving examples to you. But we kind of wanted to give you, and I was allowed to give you this little nugget now of the wider strategies, because it is such a fundamental part of our children at the moment, is expressing their emotions and checking in with them, but it's not just quite there yet. So that brings us to the end of this evening's session. I am going to hand over to Dan to see if we've got anything come through on the Jamboard, if we've got any questions. Just a reminder that the next session, because this is part of the CPD that's running each week, is effective maths gap teaching with Jill, looking at those DFE expectations and the framework. As always, Dan and I are always happy to be here and support you guys, but we couldn't have done tonight without Vicki, without Joe, without the support from Jill, Jen and John, and obviously using some of Gemma's resources again. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand over to Dan and see if there's any questions. Please do feel free, obviously, to unmute yourselves if needs be. Thanks, Dan.
Yes, not surprisingly, probably we haven't got any contributions to our Jamboard, or any questions posed in the meeting chat as such. So we're a relatively small group. If anyone does have any comments they'd just like to share, then obviously feel free to unmute and share that, because obviously we all bring something to this. We're all using these tools in different ways. We may have overlooked something that you think is a really useful tool, so we're happy to share and listen to other ideas. I think probably the Jamboard one is one. It's a bit like a seed we sow. We throw something out. Somebody somewhere might have a look at it and think, yeah, I could really use that. So it's probably people need a little bit of time to play with it. So we haven't got any questions as such.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Well, okay, well, we will stop recording, and the recording will be sent out, and it will go on the CPD part of the hub along with the slides by the start of next week. I send those out normally tomorrow, and it will go on our YouTube page. But thank you, everyone, and we hope you found it useful. Hopefully there's not too many nuggets like last time, but there's something for everyone. And thanks again, Vicki and Joe.